Hi guys, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope you're doing well. My name is Tanya Byrne and tonight we are here to celebrate the wonder that is Holly Bourne on the publication of her 10th young adult novel, The Yearbook. Not only is Holly a best-selling and critically acclaimed author, but she's also a passionate mental health advocate and a proud feminist. And she also happens to be one of my favourite humans. We met in 2015 when we did a panel together for the first ever YA shot. Then in 2018, we collaborated on Flawed, which was the novel that we wrote with Sarah Barnard, Non Pratt, Melinda Salisbury, Lisa Williamson and Eleanor Wood. Thanks to our shared love of pancakes and her cat Jean Louise, we've since become friends. So not only have I seen her career grow since Soulmates was published in 2013, but I've also seen her grow into the fierce, fearless storyteller that she is today. So she has become one of my favourite authors, and 10 novels is a remarkable achievement, and I'm so very, very proud of her. So please join me in celebrating that today, and wherever you are right now, give a warm welcome to the Queen of YA herself, Holly Bourne.
Hi dude, this is so fun that we're just hanging out, but it's work.
I know, I love it. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm slightly sweaty, but apart from that, I'm all right. How are you?
I'm good. Now, first things first, where is she?
She is right there, guys.
There she is. Oh, she's my absolute favourite. This cat has been the only thing that's got me through lockdown. I am so thrilled. And I'm sure she'll let us know if I ask anything inappropriate.
Yeah, she will. She'll go, meow.
She'll let us know. So anyway, how are you doing, darling? So you handed a book in today. That's fantastic.
I did. I actually poured myself a celebratory drink.
Lovely.
So yes, I've finished my new adult book, which I'm here to talk about YA.
Of course.
So I've handed it in. It was due in February 2020. So I'm quite relieved that I met that deadline with time to spare.
Excellent. And how did you celebrate? Did you have a nap? That's how I celebrate most things, and also any mild inconvenience. Nap.
I listened to a podcast about Britney Spears.
Oh, have you, the one on the BBC? yeah. I've got that added, but I haven't had to. I'm too busy listening to my true crime nonsense, but I will get around. Excellent. Right. So let's get going. So why don't we just throw it back right to the beginning? So your writing career started as a news journalist.
I did.
Yes. Then you were an editor.
Yeah.
Then you were an agony aunt for charity. So fiction, when did that come about? Have you always been a writer, or did you suddenly wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm just going to write a book and be really brilliant at it?
No. I've always wanted to write, mainly because it was the only thing I'm vaguely good at. No, it's true. And yeah, so I was that kind of stereotypical author as a child, and that, you know, in nap time would have a torch under my duvet reading and writing stories. And I remember when I was 7, I wrote this book that I thought would be a best-selling picture book called
Why wouldn't it be?
Called A Bump in the Clouds, and it was about a squirrel called Bushy who lived in heaven and went to a birthday party, and they were all playing musical bumps, and he bumped too hard and fell down to earth, and then had to get into heaven, and was really into that for many years.
Wow. So how did we go from Bushy to Soulmates? Was Soulmates the first time that you tried to write a novel?
It was, yeah. I had tried to write this sort of memoir of me and all my friends' lives called All the Men, and each chapter was just
nice.
a man's name, and it was just a ridiculous story or something weird, and it was the worst thing that anyone has ever written. And then I was working as a news journalist, so I did a journalism degree and got a job as a news reporter at a local newspaper, very naively. And of course I just thought, I'll just be covering the school fates and the mayor coming to open the shopping centre, and not realising it's oh no, if someone's been murdered or hit by a train or all these horrible things that sadly happen, it's your job to go and get the story. And you can't do that if you're an empath. It doesn't suit you.
Yeah. Don't really mix, do they? That whole kind of, can I talk about your dead loved one, please? You know, turning up on someone's doorstep.
It was awful. And I think because people sensed I wasn't this sort of hard-nosed journalist just there for the story, I was obviously quite good at my job and I got more out of people, and that meant and it was just this, I hated it. I was highly miserable, and actually like my hair fell out from stress and misery. And so I just started writing this fantasy romance novel as a way to just like escape my life. And I didn't think anything would come of it, and it took over 2 years. But yeah, whenever I came back from a horrible deadline or a horrid shift, I would just like escape into this novel, and never thought anything would come of it. But you know, when I finished it, I read it back and I was like, this isn't dreadful. I mean, it's mostly dreadful. It's not terrible. And so spent a long time editing it and stuff, and then eventually it got published. But yeah, I kept being a journalist for my first 5 books. I moved out of news journalism into charity journalism, which was much better,
much more pleasant.
And and did, you know, writing books and helping teenagers, and the two just kind of cross-pollinated so perfectly.
It's because I was going to, the next question I was going to ask is why YA? Do you think working for a youth charity kind of gave you an insight into what teenagers care about and what they're concerned about?
It's a mixture. I'd say there's like 2 reasons I like write for YA, and one would be working at this youth charity, just, you know, the privilege to have access to so many teenagers' inner lives, and because it was an online charity that only offers advice online, so it's anonymous. People would come to you with all these problems, and they thought that they were the only one with this thing. Like, I'm so embarrassed to say this, or I'm too scared to say this, and they would share these things with you. And you kind of wanted to say to them, you're like the 8th person.
Yeah, you're not alone.
Like, if only you could see how. And so I would never have plagiarized anything, but you just saw the themes that, you know, were coming out. So there was that, you know, and I was like, because I was working as a journalist and had access to all the kind of top psychotherapists and mental health that I was interviewing, or doctors. And so I kind of could come at telling a issues book or something for teenagers from quite a good knowledge base. So there was that. But the other thing, I'm sure you would agree, is I just think if you're a creative person, I don't understand why anyone wouldn't write YA, because to me, that's where the best stories are.
Yeah, you're preaching to the converted there. Also, I've just realised that I should have mentioned at the top that we're going to do Q&A at the end. So just put your questions in the box and we'll answer them at the end. So last week, you and I were sitting in the sunshine having a conversation about toxic positivity, which I know is something that you feel quite passionate about. As a YA author, do you think it's important to be honest with readers?
Completely. I think there's some people would argue that a generic convention of YA is it has to have some sort of hopeful ending.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I always think that my endings are hopeful, and then my readers say otherwise. So I'm like, no, but
it's subjective. I think it's subjective,
For me, as if there's growth, if somebody has grown in a way that's going to make them more authentically themselves and more loving of that authentic self, that to me is a hopeful ending. But in order to get to that place, I never shy away from telling the truth, and I've been so lucky that Usborne have just never reined me in. And they have just, you know, they're like, we trust you, we trust your research, we trust your process. And then we have lots of processes in place during the editorial. So we've got this woman that we've been working with for I think 3 books now, who's a psychologist at university who specializes in being triggered, and, you know, she goes through the manuscript to make things as safe as they can be. But you've got to tell the truth. And I think with my last book before the yearbook, The Places I've Cried in Public, like, went to such dark places, and I was like, I can't, this is YA. But then I had worked at YouthNet, and I had seen so many young people, so many young girls especially, go through what Amelie had went through, particularly the really severe things that she goes through in that book. And I was like, they know about this. This is their bread and butter, and that's awful. And we need to tell the truth about it, and name these problems, and give teenagers the vocabulary and the understanding and the education of these horrible things that are happening in their life, but hopefully in the vehicle of a story that they enjoy, that's easy to read and that makes them laugh and recognize themselves. So yeah, I'm always like, the world is horrible.
Everything's terrible.
And I'm like, but we can change it. And life is a joke about cats.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that I love most about your writing and you as a person, is that you don't shy away from speaking up about these issues on stuff like, you know, sexism, mental health, consent. But you do it in a responsible and engaging and empowering way, and even in a humorous way as well, which I think you wouldn't think of, you know, these stories being funny. How important to you is it to get that balance right between, you know, being honest, but then also it being an engaging story as well?
That's, to me, that's the craft. That's the thing I worry about day and night, especially when I'm drafting. That's what keeps me up, worrying. Has it gone too dark? Is it too light? Is there too many jokes? Is this bit boring, even though it's quite important? And it's getting those balances between light, dark, education, entertainment, keeping in mind that your readers are technically under the age of 18, although I would argue about 50% of my readers are over the age of 18. So wanting to be, you know, having that safeguarding hat on and wanting children to be safe, but also knowing that the world isn't safe and you need to be honest about that in it. So it's just this seesaw that I just constantly balancing on, and yeah, hope that I pull it off, and yeah, and then and I also just I think being a news journalist, miserable as I was and bald as I was, it does train you to write in a very direct, active voice, get rid of anything that's not important way, which I think is really beneficial when you're writing, particularly for teenagers who might stereotypically have more distractions. And so I feel quite lucky that I was a trained journalist, because, you know, I just have my kind of Orwell's list of good writing on my desk, and just cutting everything out. And so hopefully you're just sort of zooming through the story whilst laughing and crying.
Yeah. Do you think that fiction helps to engage readers with these sort of issues in a way that maybe a mental health campaign doesn't, for example?
It's tricky. I've done some work this year with this incredible charity called Empathy Lab, which I'm sure
I've heard of it.
Check them out, and they've done some incredible research that sort of shows what happens to a brain whilst it's reading a story, and shows how basically stories are basically the most potent way to have social change, to change somebody's mind, to increase empathy. And yeah, in terms of mental health, yeah, I guess writing a book like about PTSD, maybe, for example, in The Place I Cried in Public, or The Yearbook, which is about dealing with an abusive parent, or Am I Normal Yet, that dealt with OCD. Yeah, I hope that by people being immersed in those stories and with those characters, they're learning and understanding, and that brain science is going there. But I don't know, I feel like, well, we talk about this a lot as friends, but like I feel like awareness raising is only part of activism, especially I think with mental health at the moment. There's so much awareness but not much like funding, very long waiting lists for people to get help. So, you know, it's like being aware only gets you so far, and it's, to me, like the two most important things for mental health, particularly in young people, for me, is like we need money so people can get help, and we've got to stop treating mental illness as this thing that exists in a vacuum, and look into how society makes us mentally unwell, and so look at a trauma-informed way of understanding society, and how being a girl can be traumatic, or being, you know, not white can be traumatic, or having a parents who don't treat you how they should could be traumatic, or you know, just like the moment you leave your house not feeling safe, and all those things that like shouldn't, like, people should be safe, should be fed, people should be able to, you know, like not be scared of being made homeless. like these constant stresses that an unhealthy, unequal society, I think, can create an unhealthy brain. And so yeah, to me, I'm like, we need money and money and money and money and money, and people to be educated.
Yeah. So, I mean, getting back to the question of balance, I mean, how do you balance challenging readers and then taking care of them as well? Because I know you've helped create online apps that teach young people about sexual consent, for example, and you also work with Women's Age and Rethink. Do you feel a responsibility to help your readers beyond your books? So when they're done reading, for example, is that why you get involved in stuff outside of writing?
I think so. I think it's a mixture of things. I mean, I always try to signpost to charities at the end of my book. I take safeguarding very seriously. I don't ever reply to any DM on Instagram, and I regularly kind of post on Instagram like, I can't do that, that's not safe. So I really care about my readers and want them to be siphoned off to the right places. But then personally, I kind of felt like when I was working for a charity for 5 years, it kind of gave you some sort of pass. You were like, I am actually quite a good person working here, because the pay is crap. It can be very demoralizing, just funding bids never coming off, all that sort of stuff. But it's just, incredible thing to do. And yeah, from a selfish point of view, just hugely rewarding. And then I had books as my hobby. And then when it got to the point where I couldn't quite do both and had to, become a full-time writer, oh, what a hardship, I know I'm very lucky, but like, I just missed that charity element, like, because people who work for charities are just always amazing. It's just, just fighting for something. And with charities, they've got a very specific cause and people who really understand that specific cause and kind of know how to fix it, which really appeals to me, because sometimes I can just get lost in just how terrible the world is and where do you even start. And charities are like, we've decided on this thing, we know that here's and so that so being teamed with Women's Aid for the Place of Crime in Public was just amazing. And I was so proud of everything that book achieved and everything the campaign around that book achieved. And it was so sad when lockdown hit, because we were just traveling around universities and educating young people about healthy relationships, and I just had never been more like professionally like
Well, I mean, you're known for writing and for advocating for these big issues, but knowing you personally, more than anything, I think you love love, and I think despite everything that's happened and everything you've survived, you still believe in love. And funnily enough, I was thinking yesterday that the plot for Soulmates and my next novel, After Love, are actually, they're very different, but they have a similar energy in that they're both about big, loud, world-ending love. And they're both about girls called Poppy. Yes. So is love the thing, Holly? Is that the red thread that runs through all of your stories?
I think so. I mean, I just want to take a moment now to just, everyone who's watching, Tanya's new book is
stop it.
Amazing. Like, honestly, After Love, I read it last year and it blew my mind. It's been delayed for a year, but it's coming out, like, it's so good. And it's got soulmate themes actually.
Yeah.
That kind of it's just amazing. It's just got but yes, love.
Love is the key.
I think it's I know it's become such a cliche, but I really believe that love is the only thing more powerful than hate. And love is the only thing that you can turn to. What I find really sad about the way society works is we're just never taught how to find love, how to grow love, how to nurture it, when it's basically the one thing that will increase your happiness is your ability to form healthy, authentic, respectful attachments with other human beings, whether that's romantically or in your family or with friends or colleagues. That impacts your career prospects, impacts your health, your mental health. It just, and we're just never really taught about it. And I think one of the reasons that is just because love requires such vulnerability.
Yeah.
And we live in a society where we're just always having to be game face. I find that really hard. before the pandemic, what I used to love to do was sit on a train and just watch people, and just because I'd just be looking at them and I'd just be like, I know underneath this person with the makeup or the beard and the suit and the newspaper and the phone and the briefcase is just, there will be pain and there'll be suffering, and yet we all pretend that's not the case, and that's such a barrier to love, and love requires such bravery and courage. And so yeah, I hope I tell stories that encourage people to turn to love and take those leaps, but also to not take them with the wrong person. You know, it's love, I think, can be very damaging when you're with someone where you feel like love is conditional, or you have to kind of shave off a bit of yourself and be like, okay, if I hide this bit from this person for the rest of my life, then they'll love me, you know. And it's and I think some of that comes from learning how to love yourself as well. So I mean, I'm half American, so you kind of like to get cheesy, but if you're not gonna welcome and love like the shadow parts of yourself, then that it's harder then. So yeah, I think it's what love is all comes down to. And I think you know, when society at the moment particularly feels very filled with hate and anger, and that to me all boils down to self-hatred. Like if people are filled with hate, it's at themselves and they're just projecting it out. So I wish that we taught people how to love more and better, because I think that would undo a lot of problems.
Well, I mean, if you just look at what's happened this week following the Euros, I mean, I was very dejected on Sunday, and then Monday I just couldn't go onto Twitter at all. But then seeing the kind of outpour of love for Marcus Rashford and the mural in Manchester and the things that people have done, just kind of, it's a way of counterbalancing, isn't it? And reminding you and restoring your faith really that it isn't all bad when things feel so very terrible. So what other, apart from love, what other themes do you find yourself returning to again and again in your writing?
I was thinking about that. It's weird having 10 books out. It has made me quite reflective, that and being stuck in the house reading.
Yeah, that will do it.
And yeah, because whenever you sit down to start telling a story, you're like, why this story? Why taking up this space? You know, if you've told 9 already, why tell this one? You know, and so I always want each story I tell to be different and unique and be saying something new. But yeah, there are themes that come up, and yeah, one I think is about self-love and self-acceptance. I think a theme that I'm finding that I'm coming to a lot is something we've just talked about, which how I believe that mental illness is a symptom of an unhealthy society rather than a random malfunction of somebody's brain, and so sort of a trauma-informed way of seeing things. Realise there's a lot of projects in my way book. Yeah. I've always got like a project,
like the yearbook, like,
in a yearbook, you know. And in What's a Girl Gotta Do, Lottie had her like feminism campaign, and in It Only Happens in the Movies, Audrey's got her like A-level GCSE coursework, and in the Manifesto on How to Be Interesting, Bree's got her blog. I mean, God, how does that age me? I was writing about blogging. At the time, it was what everyone did. So yeah, I think it's, yeah, those are the things. It's like love, female friendship.
Yes, I was going to say that. Yeah.
Which I just seem incapable of not putting in books, just because, as you know, like my female friends are my life.
And it's very important, empowering, I think, incredibly empowering for women to see those positive relationships in stories.
Completely. It's just yeah, I just love women. I just love spending time with women.
For very different reasons.
Yeah, I like the only men that I spend time with are like my fiance's mates. Just like, and they're okay because he's decent and he's picked them. So I'm like, all right.
Yeah, they will approve.
Like, I'm just like pushing them out of the way to meet their girlfriends or whatever, and I'm just like, tell me, like, come join my group of women that I love.
Exactly, I love it. I know people talk a lot about the difficult second album, and I know I definitely struggled writing my second novel. So, how easy was it to write the manifesto on How to Be Interesting?
That wasn't one of the books that I really struggled with, actually. I remember at the time everyone saying second novel syndrome, and I've definitely had some books which have killed me, where I've just been like, you're just kind of weeping on your editor. Whereas I feel like with the Manifesto on How to Be Interesting, I think that was the book I found my voice. So Soulmates was quite an anomaly book for me. And I always feel quite uneasy when readers have started. I'm always very delighted when readers start going through my backlist, but if they send me
they start number one and,
when they kind of hold up Soulmates, I'm like, oh, I don't know if you'll like that one. Because it's so
it is quite different from your others, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was at the time, I was very young when I wrote it. I was 22, and also I was trying to be a satire about all the books that are very popular at the time, so like Twilight and all these like forbidden romance books, which were huge at the time. And it was just, I had basically just had this really good idea for this paranormal romance, which is like, if you meet your soulmate, the world's going to end. And I was like, yeah, you just got to write that. But whereas the Manifesto on How to Be Interesting was like a contemporary about a girl who self-harms and really struggles. And that was when I was working at YouthNet, was when I was writing that book. And that was, I think I just really found my voice like that. And I remember my editor messaging me just going, this is, and brand wise as well, I think that's when my publishers were like, this is Holly Bourne, this is what her books look like. And we've just kind of, that wasn't the book that killed me. There have been many that have. Are We All Lemmings and Snowflakes? I had a complete meltdown about.
That was going to be my next question. Which one was the hardest?
It was, Are We All Lemmings and Snowflakes? Because I wrote about maths, and oh my god, like I once got my tax returns so wrong, the bailiffs came round. So I don't know why.
God.
It's just really like literally came round. Like you think you owe this money, but you owe more, and you literally can't add up.
Oh god. I think that's something that we all kind of go to bed and worry about at night, really, isn't it?
And it happened to me. It's all right. I got audited as well, just all the time.
I got audited as well. But luckily I have an accountant, so I just send all so I can always blame him. But still ultimately it's my responsibility. So that Lemmings and Snowflakes was really difficult to write.
It was. I think it was I had to get in the head of somebody who had she was diagnosed with. She fought the diagnosis, but she had been diagnosed with bipolar. It was first person present tense, I think. So I was having to ride the waves with her, which I found emotionally very exhausting. And then it was when I had spent like a year researching this, keep talking about it, that's very important to me, which is this idea of a trauma-informed idea of seeing mental illness. And I've been going to all these seminars and reading these incredible books about trauma, and I was like, I really, 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 really believe in this, and I really want my readers to start, if they suffer from mental illness, to kind of maybe reframe it, because I think it could be really helpful. And so I just kind of choked a lot under everything that I was trying to pull off, and I hope I did, and I'm really proud of the book. But that was like a terrible year creatively. Like the amount of drafts I went through. So the Manifesto was great. Lemmings and Snowflakes, I was just like,
But then I think that speaks to you as a writer, and the pressure that you put on yourself, really, to be responsible and to tell these stories in, as you were saying, in an honest way, and looking after your readers, and maybe, like you said, getting them to rethink or reframe the way that they think about mental health. And I think that's really important. But it's difficult to write sometimes, and it's really hard to kind of be able to articulate the most painful things that people go through, and it feels impossible sometimes. I know we've discussed it. So what keeps you going? 10 books, Holly, 10. What keeps you pushing forward?
It's always anger. That's literally
I wasn't expecting that.
Always anger.
Okay.
I've never I get into a bad mood about something.
You get a bee in a bonnet.
Yeah, bee in my bonnet, and then out comes a book. And I keep thinking, as I get older and hopefully more chilled, like maybe I'm just going to calm down and not get angry anymore. And it's like, no, something happens and I'm just completely malfunctioned. And then I'm like, oh, there'll be a story in here, like this rage.
But that's what we do as writers. We write through things. That's how we process, I think.
I really do. Yeah, it's I do lose my temper a lot, and the world makes me very angry. And but you're always angry for a reason, and so yeah. So as long as the world keeps making me angry, I'll still.
Right. I can't imagine everything's going to be sunshine and rainbows anytime soon.
No, and it shifts and stuff, but it's anger, and it's also I don't know, because you say 10 books, but what I find, like, what's wonderful about novels and what's frustrating about writing novels is you're taking a teeny tiny fragment of society or the human experience, and you're dedicating like 80,000 words to it. So you're kind of picking up grains of sand off the beach, really. And even then, you're not really doing that grain of sand justice, even with a whole 80,000 words. Like, I wrote a whole book about secondary school with the Manifesto on how to be interesting, and thought, you know, and that book was all about how bullies might have a reason for being where they are, and, you know, mean girls might not be so mean. And because, like, that's a grain of sand on the beach, like, that's, you know, that is a reality. But then when I got the idea for the yearbook, I was like, I want to write a book about how my language, I don't give a flying fuck why they're like that. It has legacy. Like, you know, bullying and psychological torture at school has lasting legacy, and that is not okay. It's not okay that, you know, you have these kids, like, you look at year 7s starting secondary school with their rucksacks on their back, you know, really excited, and they're just these kids, and then they just, so many of my readers are like, school just ruined me, like 5 years later. And I'm like, and I'm not saying that teachers aren't incredible, and, you know, that puberty might not also be responsible, and all these other wider things going on in society, but like, bullying in school is still terrible, especially now that you add the fact that you can't escape school, you go home and it's all online. And so I wrote the yearbook about, what if you don't care why your bully was a bully? What if that doesn't interest you because you're actually, you've got trauma, and you're scared to do this, you're scared to go to tennis lessons because you hate PE so much, you know, just because people teased you about what you look like in the changing room, you know, like, you're too, like, these limits on your adult life because of those 5 years. And so that was a different grain of sand. So in terms of books, I'm hopeful that, the beach is just filled with these tiny microcosms that you want to study, and then know, oh, I've not quite covered that, and so you pick up another one whilst very angry.
Well, I mean, that kind of leads me neatly onto my next question, because your work ethic is astonishing. You've consistently published a book a year, or sometimes 2, since Soulmates came out in 2013, which I know from personal experience is requires a tremendous amount of discipline. So do you still have the time and space to experiment and indulge yourself, and, you know, really explore different ideas? The beach of sand, all the different
beach of sand. I'm starting to feel like I have started to take my pedal off the foot, my foot off the pedal a bit. Like, this manuscript that I delivered today is a year late. It's a year late, and it needed to be a year late because of the pandemic, and then I was very sick last year. I had to go to hospital, and also I was just, you know, you need to rejuvenate, and you need to live and stuff. So I am slowing down a bit, and that hunger and thirst that I had in my 20s is still there, but I'm starting to realize that, like, there's more important things. So, like, for the first 5 years of my career, I was working full time and writing a book a year. I don't know how you did that. I had no life, like, none. I literally wrote on the train on the way to work, wrote my lunch hours, took annual leave to go on tour, and I loved it, but I had nothing, and, you know, I wasn't as healthy as I could be. And I'm learning to slow down a bit and spend time with awesome people like you, and to you know, and so I've pushed back a bit, and I still am a workaholic, but I'm hopefully less of one, and hope that it's better for my readers that I'm incubating a bit more, and making sure that when I you know, put a book out, I've really thought about it and why I'm telling that story. And so I'm going to start researching my next YA novel this summer, but I'm really looking forward to just like sitting down with this massive stack of textbooks I've got.
It's my favourite bit.
Yeah, I love it. When the idea is still in your head and you've not ruined it yet by started to write it.
By committing it to paper, and it's just that magical moment where you just like, it's all you can think about. I love that. Yeah,
it's like having a new relationship, isn't it? You're just like, I can't stop thinking about this. I think Sarah Crossan once called it the slutty new idea.
But that'd be about right. But which again leads me on to my next question quite nicely, because we know how you feel about toxic positivity. But talk to me about joy, Holly Bourne. You know, what do you love about writing? I know it's hard sometimes, but you must love it to keep going.
There's little things. I love meeting my readers. So if you're out there, like, I miss you. Like, oh, I pulled out my headphone.
I thought you dropped your drink for a minute, then I was going to go, oh no.
No, I love meeting people. I love hearing from people who have found my books to be soothing or to help them understand their own life. That's just the complete, like, the best privilege, especially with books like The Places I've Cried in Public. I've just get so many messages about that book still, for people who are like, I didn't realize I was in an abusive relationship until I read this book, or I left him because I read this book, or I went to therapy. It's just, I get tearful just thinking about it, because you have to take yourself creatively to such dark places to produce that, in the hope that your darkness is going to light a light in somebody else that you've never met. And they could be reading it in 7 years' time. It's this wonderful payoff where the few people who have seen that light tell you. It's like, always tell writers.
Yes.
It's like, if you like their work, it's not weird, it's not intense, it will make their day.
Yeah.
So there's that. I don't know if you're the same, but when I read back a draft for the first time, most of the time I think it's terrible, but sometimes I come across a sentence or a joke that I've forgotten I wrote, and I'm like, oh, that's quite good.
You're just like, did I write that? I wrote that.
You're just like, have a bit of a strut. It's like, you know, when you randomly if you ever play pool or snooker, like when I was young at the pub, I used to try and do it to make boys fancy me. And I was never very good, but sometimes you just get this random thing where you're just suddenly good at pool for like 4 shots, and you've got this thing that we used to call the strut, where you just start walking around. And so I like that, but writing equivalent of that. And then to me, again, I'm not trying to make this like a massive love-in between you and me, but it's the people you meet when you work in children's publishing. It's just, I've met the most extraordinary, passionate, dedicated, challenging, curious, loving, generous people, whether that's other authors, editors, librarians, booksellers, festival organisers, readers, both young and old. It's just, for people who like YA, are just great.
Yeah.
And I know there's lots to talk about toxicity in YA, and you know, but to me personally, I've just met so many epic people, because it is just this weird area of publishing where you are just quite the underdog. Nobody takes you seriously. Teenagers are really hard work. You can't market to them. And so the people who are like, I'm going to dedicate my life to getting teenagers to read because it's good for them, like, they're usually quite great. And so, yeah, my favorite thing about writing for young people is the people in that world.
Excellent. So I know you were keen to move back to the South Coast, especially after lockdown. So what is it about here that you feel so drawn to?
Why do I feel drawn to Sussex? I just seem to get on with everyone I meet in Sussex. It seems to be a mix. Everyone just sort of seems decent. And I liked London, but I hated how I found some things about it inauthentic. I hated how you can never just meet somebody. You always had to book them up about 4 months in advance. I'm not, that's, you know, just, I'm so busy. No, I'm so busy. Oh, I'm so busy. Or can you do this date? No, I can't do that date. I was just like, it's fine. I get that people are busy, but I just, in Sussex, it's people are like, yeah, I'll come to the pub. That sounds great. And it's just that slightly slower. But mainly I'm a massive nature junkie, and the South Downs are just
I mean, we're so lucky here because we have the South Downs and we have the sea, so it's like being spoiled, really, that we have both.
And I found creatively I suffered quite a bit living in London for a couple of years. I think it's just the moment you leave your house, there's so much stimulation. You can't even just get a pint of milk without walking past about at least 80 people. And so you're just, and I felt that cognitive load of just having to navigate through a space just sort of depleted me, whereas now I just go for a walk up the Downs and, you know, I can just spend time with these imaginary people I've created in my head and work out what to write next. And yes, so nature is just very good for me personally, but I know some people go mad in the countryside, so it's whatever works.
Exactly. So 10 books, Holly, 10. Do you have any advice for new writers, especially those that debuted during the pandemic?
Oh, guys.
Because I know you had a book come out in the pandemic as well. So
my last adult book. Yeah, luckily it wasn't my debut, but it was still a painful experience. My adult book, Pretending, came out, I think, at like the worst time, in that even Amazon wasn't selling books. Like, in the booksellers hadn't quite figured out how to switch to online. It was right at that, oh well, like we're all locked in our houses, everything's closed time. And well, to writers in the pandemic, I'd just be like, publishers are very aware that you published into a pandemic. They do, like, that's all the reassurance that I've been given from above, is like, they know, they understand. Oh,
there she is. Sorry.
And in terms of anyone who wants to write, it's just, my advice is always don't wait for permission. Give yourself permission. Nobody can tell the story that you want to, like, you know, you're going to tell your story best. So it's just trying to, like, just know that know that the act of creation is ruining this idea in your head, and surrendering to that awful feeling of going, up here it was amazing, and down here on the page it's a pile of shit. That is what every author whose work I love says. And every author who's like, oh no, I just find writing really easy, I don't like their books. But everyone who's just like, I'm terrible when I read back my drafts, it's, you know, it's just like every author unanimously hates their first drafts, find it really hard, has imposter syndrome. It's like, why should I be telling this is rubbish. And it's just, but they power through. And so it's just having that self-belief to be like, I believe in this story and I believe that I'm the right person to be telling the story. I mean, obviously that's a whole other topic, but you know, if you're telling an appropriate story to your life experience, not, you know, but it's that really believing that and having that and knowing that any author struggles with what you're struggling with, and that makes you a writer. So if you think you're rubbish, you're just a writer, keep writing. The only difference between people like you and me is that we've just kept going through that self-doubt and stuff. Yeah.
So, right, well, final question then. What's next? Is there something that you haven't written about yet that you'd like to tackle?
I am spending this summer, as I said, I've got my big lot of textbooks. So the thing that I'm looking into for my next YA is, not really allowed to say much, but about beauty. That's all I'm going to say. And yeah, so I've got a lot of reading to do, but I got angry about something in the news. I think I sent you a WhatsApp just going, what? And thus the story came a week later.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you for Holly. I think we're going to answer a couple of questions now, so we'll just bear with us a second. First question is from Leslie Martin.
Hello, Leslie.
Hi, Leslie. I reviewed Soulmates for the School Librarian Journal when it came out. Do you think you would go back to writing fantasy or dystopia?
Oh, well, thank you so much for that review. Like, as debut me in 2013, like, oh my God, thank you. Like, I know that I have my career only because of people like you who are championing me from the start. So thank you so much. Fantasy or dystopia, it's only if the idea fits. So yeah, I have gone contemporary for a very long time, but I'm playing with the idea that my next YA about this particular topic that's interesting me. I am experimenting in my head if I can go that way. So never say never. It's just it's hard to explain, Tanya, I'm sure you're the same, but you're like, I don't get to decide. Like, this weird part of my psyche has decided that this is where the story is and this is how it's going to be told. And Stephen King says it's like finding a fossil. You just like, the fossil exists and you've just got to get it out. But yeah, never say never.
So our next question is from Bailey Lawrence. The Places I Cried in Public is one of my favourite books. So firstly, thank you, Holly. But what inspired you, pushed you to write a book on such a sensitive topic, and how did you write it in such a beautiful way?
Thank you. It was one of those things where you had this kind of combustion of two things at once. And one was, because I worked as an agony aunt for 5 years, it was particularly helping people with their sex and relationship problems. And that's where, sadly, I kind of got my immersion into the world of violence against women and intimate violence against women in relationships, and realised just what an epidemic it was. It was all day, every day. That was mainly what that helpline was for. And so you just saw the scale of the problem. And yeah, all of the girls who are writing to me are kind of going, but he's my boyfriend. So so that was something that had changed me forever, that job, seeing that I will never be the person I was before I took on that role. And it's a very hard thing to kind of choose a matrix analogy, take the red pill for. But yeah, I was like, I really want to talk about abusive relationships in teenagers, because most teenage relationships are abusive. Like, we need to start talking about that, as uncomfortable as it is. So there was that, but I just didn't know what to hook it on. And then I basically had a nervous breakdown one day at Clapham Junction train station, and all the trains were delayed, and I was having a very hard time in my life. And I was trapped there for 1 hour and 45 minutes because all the trains were stopped, and I just sobbed uncontrollably in that way where, I don't know, this woman that I follow on Instagram called the Holistic Psychotherapist calls them dark nights of the soul.
Oh, nice. Also playing tonight at the Dublin Castle.
Really?
I'm joking.
But, I mean, that is a really, like, I would go and see that. And yeah, it's just, usually if you're crying in public, you're having a dark night of the soul. You're having that realization that something in your life has got to change. And public crying is something that really seems to sear themselves in our memory. And I also know that your memory is a very interesting thing. If you're in an abusive relationship, it's not stored in the right place in your brain. And so then it all started to come together, and I decided I wanted to tell the story about this girl recovering from a breakup, instead of chapters, just having these places where this boy had made her cry so badly she couldn't wait until she got home. That was one of the books where I don't feel like I had many jokes. It was really
it wasn't a laugh a minute, I have to say, but it was beautifully written.
Thank you.
I agree with that. So our next question, you're going to have to forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, is from Daya Kihanfa. To Holly, if one of your books were to be taught as part of a university module, a literature degree, which one would you want it to be, and how would you want it to be taught?
Oh, that's interesting. As part of the literature module, I think it probably would be The Places I Cried in Public, just because I want as many people to read that book as possible, because I think people need to learn what unhealthy love looks like. And yeah, in terms of literature, like, that was, I remember when I was writing it, I was kind of going, oh, this one's quite challenging, like, like there were 2 timelines, there was 2 different tenses, or it was, some books I can just go for. This one was really intricate and plotted, and I'm very proud of it. So maybe that one, although my publicist will tell me to push my latest book.
Of course, the yearbook. Right, so we actually have 2 questions from Emily Laycock, but one of them is quite similar to another one, so I'll ask the other one instead. So, do you think about what your parents' thoughts will be regarding your novels?
I do. It's weird that you say that. So actually, my parents are my first readers.
I didn't know that.
They are. They're the only people who get to see my trashy drafts, other than my poor agent and editor.
That's amazing.
I think it's a cultural thing to some degree. So, you know, I have an American family, and they're proud of their kids in America. It's just that it's like a cultural thing. They're very invested in their children's lives, very on board. My mum is British, and she said she couldn't cope when she lived there, because at the playground she would just be like sitting there with a coffee, just go, oh, whereas like all the other parents were like, Randy, that's the best climbing I've ever seen on a climbing frame in your whole life.
Good job.
And like, Declan, you go down that slide, you go down that slide, look how you go down that slide. And my mum was like, they're just on a slide. So I feel like I'm quite balanced with like the cynicism of my mum and like the interest in my dad. But I do worry about, like, so they're wonderful first readers, but it makes it hard when they're saucy things. I'm always just like, oh guys, but they were quite.
Don't read chapter 14. Don't read chapter 14.
They were quite liberal, so they were very much in the Summer of Love hippie movement. You know, they lived their life, from what I can tell. So then my mum would be like, I wore red on my wedding day. Like, I'm not going to be fussed by a blue job all day. She was like, you should have been in San Francisco in 1960. I'm like, okay, Mum, never.
Yeah, excellent.
Not easily shocked.
Yeah, well, my mother was the exact opposite, so that would. I don't think my mum ever read any of my books.
Really?
My mum and brother haven't. I don't think I've read any of my books, but that's fine.
My parents have read your books. They read all my friends' books.
Oh, stop!
I read them.
I have friends' mums that have read my books, but my mum actually hasn't. I think she said about the first one that she was scared she'd be in it. So I was like, okay, which is a typical Guyanese response of how do I make this about me? So yeah, anyway, bless her. She's no longer with us, so it's not a problem anymore. So our next question is from Rachel Huddleston. When coming up with ideas for your books, what comes first, the plot or the characters?
It's neither. It's the opening line.
Really? That's really interesting.
It's and I'm obsessed with opening lines of novels.
Mm-hmm. What's your favourite?
What's one of my favourite opening lines? I'm trying to remember. The bell jar is really good. I can't quote it exactly, but it's something to do with the summer they killed the Rosenbergs, and I just feel like that's really good. The Catcher in the Rye has a really good opening line, because it's something like, if you really want to hear all about it, I don't know, to me it's, as I said, I'll be ruminating on something I'm angry about. Somebody's just written, I hate men, as the best opening line.
There you go.
My
favourite opening line is from Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse 5, which is, all of this happened more or less. So, you know, right from the beginning, not to trust the narrator, which I always use as an example of a good, when I'm doing editing manuscripts, and say that's a great opening line, because you know right from the beginning, you can't trust anything.
It is, yeah. So I'll be ruminating on something and I don't know who the character is, or what, and then suddenly the first line, it's like Dumbo, you know, when they drop all the baby animals, like it just lands in my lap. And so yeah, the yearbook was, you don't need to read this for me to tell you what school was like. And it's already sort of saying, this book's about school, and you don't need to read it because you know it all anyway. And The Places I Cried in Public was, can you see the girl crying? And it's to do with all these traumatized girls that we just don't do anything with, who, you know, and yeah, pretending my adult book was I Hate Men, which is my favorite.
I think that would be right. What's the first line of the yearbook?
It's that one. It's as I said, it is, look, you don't need to read this to be reminded what secondary school was like. And I just love first lines, because you've got voice. You've basically got the whole book, you've got the plot, you've got the themes. It's like, yeah, so I just love opening lines and other people's, and yeah, so that is what comes, and then everything hangs off this one sentence.
Because I know people that are all about the first and the last line. They have the first line and the last line, and then they just fill in the gap.
Fair enough.
There you go. Right, so our next question is from Danielle Izette. Apologies if I've pronounced that wrong. But I am a budding YA writer who is in the process of submitting my first novel to agents. Fingers crossed, someone likes it. I actually started planning this novel in my early 20s and only completed it this year. I have now put this book to bed and I'm planning my next novel. Now I'm in my 30s. How do you advise I stay in the loop with young people's interests? What language they're using, what music they're listening to, etc. Every now and then I am hit with the realization I'm kind of old and I don't want to come across as out of touch to young people. This is the thing that we all worry about, really, isn't it?
I mean, your concern is very valid. I don't know any YA author who hasn't sent a panicked WhatsApp message to another YA author kind of going, do we need to be on TikTok? Yeah. I'm trying to think when I started writing, it was 10 years ago. And as I said, even the Manifesto on How to Be Interesting, that was all about blogging, like how the world has changed. And so the advice that I give people and myself is technology changes, but the things that make a good YA book is never any of that. It's never the slang or the fashion or whatever the in vogue social media is. And actually publishing is so slow. It usually takes about 2 years from writing a book before it comes out. So things could have moved on a lot since then. So actually chasing these trends, you'll look aged anyway. So it's just remember those universal experiences of being a teenager, which is puberty, which is school, which is first love, which is breaking free from your family, which is who am I important, am I going to matter, is anyone going to love me? It's that adolescence. And if you read I always reread Adrian Mole because I just think they're a masterclass in humor. I mean, like even the character Adrian Mole, like that's one of the best comedic names I've ever come across. Just such a good character name, and people still love those books. And he writes about the Falkland War, you know, but actually he's measuring his penis with a ruler and he's trying to paint his bedroom black, and his parents are getting divorced, and he's worried he's not going to do on his A-levels, and he's trying to get his girlfriend to have sex with him before he's ready. Like it could be now. So it's just remember that teenagers aren't actually that different, and they just have a bit more time on their mobile phones. But I would just be like, as long as you're tapping into those feelings of adolescence, am I important, will anyone ever love me, it tends to be the two main things, then your YA book is going to sing, I promise.
That's excellent advice. So we have another question from Melissa Grace Moore. When writing a character, do you picture what they look like? And if yes, have you ever seen them in real life? And then she sent you lots of kisses.
Oh, thank you. I think this is so different from everyone. So I can only, just for me personally, I never really know what they look like. They're just, because I'm in their head. I don't know if this is what it's like for you, Tanya, but it's like, unless my character is looking in a mirror and I'm writing that scene, I don't know what they look like, because it's a bit like being you. I'm in their head, like VR goggles, experiencing the world and downloading what I see. So unless there's something about their appearance is relevant to the plot. So Amber in How Hard Can Love Be is very, very tall with ginger hair, and that is going to impact how you navigate the world. You know, very tall woman, ginger hair, like that's just always going to be there. But for most, it's just I'm in their head moving through. And so yeah, I've never really see what they're like, and my editor is always like, describe, and I'm like, but it doesn't matter, like unless it
that's one thing that I'm quite careful of, is I don't describe, like body image, for example. I don't think it matters whether someone's thin or not. Yeah, so I think, yeah, I get that.
It's yeah, it's different. Yeah, so what I do love is when teenagers send me fan art. That's incredible, because then you see what they look like to that person.
Yeah.
And that's so magical, because I know that it's really been minimally described. And so I'm like, so it's really interesting with my Spinster Club trilogy, seeing the three, like how they've been interpreted. It's just it makes me just like, I feel quite touched when I'm like, oh wow, this one's completely different, and they see Lottie like this. And But yeah, Amber always has red hair and is really tall because I put that in, but the others are so up. Yeah, so that to me is, I love the reader to fill that in, but that's not right or wrong, that's just personal tasting.
Excellent. So our next question is from Liberty Salah. I have reviewed the yearbook and the places I cried in public from my school's newspaper, and I've been given the opportunity to recommend books to restock the school library with. What books would you say are okay and not okay for secondary school readers?
Secondary school readers. I mean, I think you've got to get Afterlove by Tanya Byrne.
Stop it.
It's so good, guys. It's so good. Then you can be those really smug people who like, oh, I read that already. When everyone's like, have you read this book yet? Other books that, I don't know, it's tricky because secondary school is anything from year 7 up to year 11. Ace of Spades, I think, is saying some really great stuff right now. I know that kids are loving that, so I definitely recommend getting Ace of Spades in. It would help start some really important conversations in your school. I'm trying to think what else. Sarah Barnard, she's one of our friends, but she writes very, very emotionally intelligent books about quiet teenagers, which I think is really good to have in a library, because I think so many books are about loud main characters, whereas Sarah Barnard kind of specializes in, this is the main character, but I'm actually going to tell the story from the person watching's point of view. So they're great. I'm trying to think, restock. Oh God, I think there's a book by an Osborne author. I'm trying to remember what it's called by, her name's Tamara, but she's written a really interesting book about a girl whose parent was an influencer and has put her on social media since she was a baby.
That's interesting.
And is now kind of going, I don't consent to this, and I don't.
Everyone's shouting Thames in Winter.
Thames in Winter, there we go.
It's called
Girl in Real Life by Thames in Winter. I love that. Dion, she's a Usborne bookseller and a wonderful person, and she's on it. She's so much better. Dion, yeah, you're great, Dion. Thank you. Yeah, Thames in Winter, and yeah, that I just think such a great book for right now when people are increasingly putting their children online. I feel like, so those are hopefully some good starting points.
Excellent. Right, so we've got 3 more questions.
Okay, so I'll go quickly.
Yes,
I'll go super quick.
I actually, because we've had a couple of duplicates, I'm going to say, actually, if you've had your turn, you've had your turn. Right, so Alyssa Walker would like to know, I noticed that you make a fair amount of pop culture references, particularly Harry Potter ones. How do you decide how to integrate it into the story while keeping your character, and what references to make?
It's interesting with Harry Potter. I don't think I would write about it now because I think people are reading it less. So it's definitely a very millennial benchmark pop culture reference, but it used to be the case that almost everyone knew the books, knew what house they were in, had got the pajamas from Primark. It was quite a kind of thing. And then there's also the kind of added thing that I think lots of people's relationships with those books have changed depending on how they feel about J.K. Rowling's stances on things. So I definitely, I wouldn't just put those references in now because I feel like everyone's relationship to those books has altered. Although the adult book that I'm currently writing is about a friendship following a friendship from when they were in like 2001 up to modern day. That's the book I just delivered today, and it would be weird to not have Harry Potter in there. But then then I get to kind of show how their relation, because the book's all about how social change changes you. And so it's there. So it's tricky. I do worry sometimes. I'm like, oh, maybe young people don't know this great film that I think they should watch. But I don't know, lots of time they do Google it if they don't know. It Only Happens in the Movies, there's lots of film references, and luckily they're all on Netflix now, so lots of them kind of were like, oh, I went and watched Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind after that book.
Oh, I love that too.
So good.
So good. Which would be a perfect YA novel, actually, if you think about the premise of it. It's fantastic. So the next question is from Anne-Marie McCallan. Do you find it hard to write a book from a character's perspective who is experiencing things in the book that you haven't experienced yourself? Or do you write books from your own experience?
Always a mixture of both. I think if I had literally lived through every single thing that I've written about, I would have lived more lives than I have. But I feel like the things that my characters, there'll always be some part of me that I can use to access. And then if I'm going into an experience that's not completely life experience, it's because it's feelings, isn't it? So it's anger, or it's scared, or it's vulnerability, or it's feeling you can't be yourself, you know. So I kind of do lots of research and then draw on my own emotional feelings to bring that research and that character to life in an authentic way. It's interesting, the books where things have been a lot more personal have tended to be the books that are the most successful. So it is quite interesting that where I've really kind of been like, whoa, let's just call her Polly. And yeah, so it's tricky when you're a fiction writer because it's always so personal, but it's not you at all. I would never write a memoir. I don't like people knowing my business. I have to keep saying it's fiction. But of course, there's so much of you in there at the same time. And then you want to do justice to the things that aren't your personal experience. But yeah, being a journalist helps because I just spend a lot of time researching.
Excellent. Right. So next question is from Susan Warren. Who'd you like to read for inspiration and or escapism?
Escapism, I always go back to my favourite books when I was a teenager, which are Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Snogging by Louise Byrne.
A classic.
They've not aged well. Like there are some things where I'm like, oh no. But they are the books that taught me that women can be funny and that we're allowed to be funny. And they're the first books I ever read as a teenager. I'm like, well, yeah, this is what girls are like, away from the male gaze. Like we're hilarious and we're far-fetched and we're giddy and we're silly and we're loud. And so those are like my escapism books. And then yeah, for inspiration, it's just like sometimes it can be quite mixed. Like whenever I read Maggie O'Farrell, I can't write anything for about a month.
Well, when you read a really good book, it's just like, well, why am I bothering?
Well, I felt about that about Afterlove. So. And sometimes it's and sometimes I turn to TV actually if I kind of feel like an author is gonna ruin me by being too talented. But then I just got ruined by Bo Burnham's Inside and didn't.
Oh gosh, we've discussed it so many times. I almost watched it this weekend, but I've been watching Mayor of Easttown, so I needed to finish that.
That creatively ruined me for 2 weeks. I was like, there's no point, he's a genius, I'm crap. Give up now. So it's always a mixed bag. It can either inspire or make you just think, why bother? But as I said to the person out there who wants to write, it's about overriding these instincts to put the pen down and keep going.
Right, Bailey Lawrence, forgive me, but we're running out of time. And because you've already asked a question, I'm going to skip on to the next one, which is from Julia Tufts. Out of the 10 books, is there one in particular you're most proud of? And if so, why?
Oh, I don't know. No, I don't. I think they're all, I'm all proud of them for different reasons. I could go through all 10. No, I couldn't, because they're also, my books, they are all kind of linked, but they are very different. And so, you know, you take something like The Places of Pride and Public, you know, which is just so raw, and I'm so proud of it for that reason. But then I look at How Hard Can Love Be, where I was just like, I just want like a romance where the guy is really nice and then for the go on a road trip around America. Like it's, you know, it's, because I think that's important too, to just have nice love options, to be like, teenagers, wait for the nice person, it feels good, it's good for you, like love's great, sex is great, just with the people who respect you. And so it's yeah, it's a tricky one. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Right, last 2 questions. So Nima would like to know, would you, and this is actually funny enough because I should have asked this question myself because it is something I've considered, but would you ever consider writing non-fiction?
I don't think so. Sorry, I've just decided to chew some ice, which was stupid.
Perfect timing.
I don't think so, no. I think it's, I can't read non-fiction very well. I find I always forget whatever I've just read in the previous chapter. So I think me writing it would be a disaster. Story, it's all about stories for me. Story is just so powerful. So unless I was ghostwriting somebody's autobiography, which I would then see as a story, yes, but I could never write non-fiction. No, that's just not how my brain works.
Okay. And then finally, Yvonne would like to know, did you experience any difficulties shifting from writing YA to young adult fiction?
The shift, no, I get writing adult, it's just writing a book. It's still just as hard. It's just the publication process is very different. Like if you write adult books, they get reviewed in newspapers, which never happens if you write YA. You get invited onto BBC Breakfast, which never happens if you write YA. And you have slightly more creative freedom in that your characters can be a bit more unlikable, because I think grown readers reading adult fiction are a little bit more forgiving, and kind of, I think when you've lived a bit more, you're a bit like, oh, this person's driving me mad, but I know that that will be revealed soon. Whereas with YA, to some degree, I don't know, people might disagree with me, because you wrote Heart Shaped Bruise and she's like not the nicest, and people loved that book. So it's so maybe that's just me censoring in my head. But I remember when I was writing the yearbook, considering her relationship with her parents, I was a bit like, she'd probably be even worse off than she is, and had to talk to the sensitivity reader a lot. And she was like, she would probably, and I'm like, no, but it's YA, like, you know, that's, you know, we need to, you know, there's hope there. Whereas I think adults can kind of, I don't know, that might just be me self-censoring, but those are the only things I noticed really, like, oh, The Guardian know I exist finally. But yeah, I love writing YA, as I said. I'll never leave it. It's just full of the best people. And it's just a privilege to write for young people, such a privilege. So I want, as long as I keep getting angry and picking up, and I'll keep writing.
Well, that's an excellent note to end it on, I think. So thank you so much to everyone that's joined us this evening, and for all your brilliant questions. And of course to Holly, congratulations on the yearbook coming out, and for 10 books, that's amazing. So, you know, the Queen of YA. I
don't know where that came from. I've never won any award, like, it doesn't make any sense.
Oh, but we love you. You're our queen. Thank you ever so much to Waterstones for hosting this for us and having us here. And yeah, thank you guys. You have a brilliant evening, and lots and lots of love to you, Holly. And I hope to see your face in person very soon.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much for coming, everyone, on this lovely balmy evening. And yeah, buy After Love.
Oh. Go on, meet her. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.